The elevator doors were closing when Adrian Cole realized he'd just let the best thing that ever happened to his company walk away. But it wasn't supposed to be this way. She wasn't even supposed to be in his office. One administrative error, one wrong room, one poor girl who had nothing, and somehow, in the span of 30 minutes, she'd shown him everything his million-dollar empire was missing. Now he had seconds to decide. Let her disappear into the city's endless struggle, or trust an instinct he'd buried the day his wife died. If you want to see how a single moment of courage can rewrite two destinies, stay with me until the very end. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city name. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday morning, turning downtown Chicago into a blur of gray concrete and streaming glass. Adrian Cole stood at the window of his corner office on the 43rd floor, watching tiny umbrellas drift along Michigan Avenue like scattered leaves. He didn't drink his coffee. He never did. It sat cooling on the mahogany desk behind him, steam long gone, a prop in the performance of a morning routine that had lost all meaning 3 years ago. "Mr. Cole?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 9 o'clock is here." Adrian checked his watch. 8:47. 13 minutes early. He appreciated punctuality, even if he'd already decided this interview would be short. The position was mid-level operations management, the kind of role he could fill with a dozen qualified candidates before lunch. This meeting was a formality, a box checked because his HR director insisted he stay connected to ground-level hiring. As if sitting across from strangers for 20 minutes gave him any real insight into the machine he'd built. "Send them in," he said, turning from the window. The door opened. Adrian's eyes were still adjusting from the bright overcast sky, and for a moment all he registered was a silhouette, smaller than he expected, hesitant in the doorway. Then she stepped into the light. The first thing Adrian noticed wasn't her face or her clothes, but the way she carried herself, shoulders back, chin level, eyes forward. The second thing he noticed was that everything about her appearance told a story she was trying very hard not to tell. Her interview suit was navy blue and clean, but the fabric had that particular sheen that comes from being pressed too many times, worn too often. Her shoes were practical flats, scuffed at the toes. She carried a slim folder tucked against her ribs like it contained something precious. "Mr. Cole," she said, and her voice was steadier than her hands. "Thank you for seeing me." Adrian gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." She did, with the kind of careful precision that suggested she'd practiced this moment. Back straight, ankles crossed, folder placed gently on her lap. Adrian settled into his own chair and opened the file his assistant had prepared, then stopped. The name on the tab read Marcus Delroy. He looked up. The young woman across from him was definitely not Marcus Delroy. "I'm sorry," Adrian said, his tone professionally neutral. "There seems to be some confusion. You are—" "Hazel Quinn." She said it like an offering, not a demand. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock interview." Adrian glanced at the file again, then at the clock. 8:51. "Miss Quinn, I'm scheduled to interview someone else this morning for the operations management position." Something shifted in her expression, not panic but a quiet recognition, the look of someone watching a familiar disappointment take shape. I'm here for an interview at 9. They told me suite 4307, the administrative coordinator position. Adrian felt the answer click into place before she finished speaking. Suite 4307 was 2 floors down. Different department, different interviewer. Someone in reception had sent her to the wrong elevator, and she'd followed the instructions without question because people like Hazel Quinn, people who needed the job more than they needed to be right, didn't argue with directions from corporate buildings. "I see," Adrian said quietly. "There's been a mistake." Hazel's fingers tightened on the folder, but her face remained composed. "I understand. I'm sorry for the confusion. It's not your fault. Still." She was already starting to rise. "I've taken your time. Thank you for—" "Wait." Adrian held up one hand, not quite sure why he'd spoken. "You're here. You prepared. The least I can do is talk to you for a few minutes." Hazel froze halfway out of her chair, her expression shifting between hope and wariness. "Mr. Cole, you don't have to—" "I know I don't have to." Adrian leaned back slightly, studying her. But unless you're in a hurry to get to the right floor, I'm curious. Sit, please. She sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against the glass. Adrian realized he was waiting for her to fill the silence with nervous chatter, with apologies or explanations. But Hazel Quinn did neither. She simply sat, hands folded over her folder, and waited for him to lead. "Tell me about yourself," Adrian said finally. Hazel took a breath. "I'm 26. I graduated from Roosevelt University 3 years ago with a degree in business administration. Since then, I've worked as an administrative assistant at a legal firm, a scheduling coordinator for a medical clinic, and most recently a part-time office manager for a nonprofit that helps low-income families access housing resources." Adrian noted the trajectory. Not upward, but lateral. Survival jobs. "Why did you leave the nonprofit?" "I didn't leave," Hazel said evenly. "They lost their funding. The entire program shut down last month." "I'm sorry to hear that." "So were the families we were helping." There was no bitterness in her voice, just fact. "We had a wait list of over 300 people. Now they're back to navigating the system alone." Adrian folded his hands. "And the position you're interviewing for today? Administrative coordinator. That's another lateral move." "It's a stable move," Hazel corrected gently. "Stability matters when you're not sure where next month's rent is coming from." The honesty caught him off guard. Most candidates dressed up their ambitions in the language of growth and opportunity. Hazel Quinn was telling him she needed a paycheck, and she wasn't ashamed of it. "You're overqualified for an administrative role," Adrian observed. "You have a degree. 3 years of varied experience. Why not apply for something higher?" Hazel met his eyes directly. "Because higher positions require networks I don't have, references from companies that look good on paper, and the financial cushion to wait for the right opportunity." "I don't have any of those things, Mr. Cole. What I have is a stack of bills, a landlord who's been patient but won't be forever, and the ability to work harder than anyone you'll meet today. So I apply for the jobs I can get, and I make myself invaluable once I'm in the door." The rain seemed louder in the silence that followed. Adrian had interviewed hundreds of people over the years. He'd seen confidence and desperation, polish and panic. But he'd rarely seen this, clarity without performance. Hazel wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply telling him the truth because she'd already calculated that honesty was her only advantage. "What makes you think you can make yourself invaluable?" Adrian asked. "Because I pay attention to things other people miss," Hazel said. "At the legal firm, I reorganized their filing system and cut document retrieval time by 40%. At the clinic, I noticed that patients were missing appointments because our reminder calls came too early. People forgot by the time their appointment arrived. I suggested texting reminders the day before. No-show rates dropped by 1/3. At the nonprofit, She paused, and for the first time, emotion flickered across her face. "I learned that people don't just need services, they need someone to listen long enough to understand what they're actually asking for." Adrian leaned forward. "Explain that." Hazel's hands moved slightly, an unconscious gesture. "A woman came in once looking for emergency housing assistance. She had all the right paperwork, qualified for the program, everything in order. But when I sat with her, really listened, I realized what she actually needed was help finding childcare so she could attend a job training program. The housing was temporary, the job was permanent. We helped her with both, but if I just processed the form and sent her away, she'd still be in the same cycle 6 months later. And you think that skill translates to corporate operations?" "I think people are people," Hazel said simply, "whether they're clients or coworkers or executives. Everyone wants to feel heard. Most problems aren't actually complicated. They're just poorly understood." Adrian sat back, his mind turning over something he couldn't quite name. This young woman who'd walked into the wrong interview by accident was speaking a language he hadn't heard in his own building in years. His company ran on efficiency, metrics, quarterly targets. It ran beautifully. But somewhere along the way, he'd stopped thinking about whether it ran with any kind of soul. "Miss Quinn," Adrian said slowly, "I'm going to be direct with you. The position you applied for, the administrative coordinator role 2 floors down, I have no authority over that hire. That's not my department, but I'm looking at your resume, and I'm listening to how you talk about work, and I'm thinking about whether there's a place for someone like you in this company." Hazel's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a barely perceptible leaning forward. "I can't offer you the job you came here for," Adrian continued, "but I might be able to offer you something else. I'd need to make some calls, check with my team, but before I do that, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "All right. Why do you want to work here?" Adrian gestured around the office, the city beyond. Not the standard interview answer, the real reason. Hazel was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere far below, muffled by distance and glass. "I want to work here," she said finally, "because I'm tired of wondering if I'll still have a job in 3 months. I'm tired of watching good programs collapse because funding dried up, or good teams fall apart because there's no stability. I want to work for a company that isn't one bad quarter away from disappearing, and I want—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I want to prove that someone like me, someone who didn't start with connections or safety nets, can build something that lasts." The answer hit Adrian somewhere beneath his ribs, in a place he'd learned to ignore. He thought of his son, Owen, who would turn 8 next month. Owen, who'd never known his mother. Owen, who was growing up in a world of private schools and comfortable certainties, shielded from every hardship Adrian had the power to prevent. What would Owen learn about strength if everyone around him had always been safe? Adrian made his decision. "I'm going to make a call," he said, reaching for his phone. "Don't leave." Hazel's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Cole, just wait, please." He dialed his operations director, a sharp woman named Patricia Reeves, who'd been with the company since its early days. She picked up on the second ring. "Patricia, it's Adrian. I need you to do something unconventional." "Good morning to you, too," Patricia said dryly. "What are we doing?" "I have someone in my office, Hazel Quinn. She's not on any of our interview lists, and she's not applying for any open positions in operations management, but I want you to find a place for her." There was a pause. "Adrian, you know we have protocols." "I know, and I'm asking you to bend them. 90-day trial, entry level, if that's what we have available. I'll send you her resume, and you'll see what I see. Someone smart, adaptable, and honest. We can afford to take a chance." "What makes her special?" Patricia asked, her tone shifting to genuine curiosity. Adrian looked at Hazel, who was sitting perfectly still, her hands gripping the folder like an anchor. "She walked into the wrong interview and didn't fall apart. She told me the truth when a lie would have been easier, and she's looking at work the way I used to before I forgot why any of this mattered." Patricia was quiet for a beat. Then, "Send me the resume. I'll find something." "Thank you." Adrian hung up and turned back to Hazel. "Here's what's going to happen. My operations director is going to reach out to you, probably later today. She'll have a position available. I don't know exactly what yet, but it'll be legitimate, and it'll be yours if you want it. 90 days to prove yourself. After that, we evaluate." Hazel stared at him. I don't understand." "You came here for an interview you never got," Adrian said. "Consider this a different interview, one you just passed." "But you don't even know if I can do the work." "No," Adrian agreed, "but I know you'll figure it out. And I know that if I let you walk out of here without making this offer, I'll regret it." For the first time since she'd entered the office, Hazel's composure cracked. Her eyes went bright, and she pressed her lips together hard, fighting for control. When she spoke, her voice was rough. "Why?" Adrian thought about his son. He thought about the kind of man he wanted Owen to become, the kind of world he wanted Owen to believe was possible. He thought about the 3 years since his wife died, the 3 years he'd spent building walls around everything that could hurt. "Because someone took a chance on me once," Adrian said quietly. "And because I have a son who's going to grow up watching how I treat people when I have the power to help or walk away. I want him to see me choose the first option." Hazel nodded slowly, once, and wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." "I think I do," Adrian said. "Now go home. Wait for Patricia's call." "And Miss Quinn?" "Yes?" "When you start, people are going to wonder why you're here. Some of them will assume things. That I made an exception for the wrong reasons, or that you're not qualified, or that you won't last. Don't waste energy trying to convince them otherwise. Just do the work. The rest will follow." Hazel stood, tucking her folder under her arm. She extended her hand across the desk, and Adrian shook it. Her grip was firm and warm. "I won't let you down," she said. "I know." She turned toward the door, then paused and looked back. "Mr. Cole? The person you were supposed to interview today? Marcus Delroy. I hope he gets a fair shot, too." Adrian smiled faintly. "He will, I promise." Hazel nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. Adrian stood alone in the silent office, the rain still drumming against the glass. He looked down at the file on his desk, Marcus Delroy's resume, pristine and irrelevant. Then he looked at the space where Hazel Quinn had sat, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the distant, abstract hope of quarterly earnings or market expansion, but the immediate human hope that came from watching someone fight quietly for a future they'd almost stopped believing in. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Delroy is here for his 9 o'clock. Adrian glanced at the clock. 9:03. 3 minutes late. "Send him in," Adrian said, "and clear my schedule for the rest of the morning. I need to make some calls." Because somewhere between the wrong interview and the right instinct, Adrian Cole had remembered something essential. The best decisions he'd ever made weren't the ones that looked good on paper. They were the ones that felt like a gamble until they proved themselves true. And Hazel Quinn was about to be the biggest gamble of his career. 2 floors below, Hazel Quinn stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. She stood just outside the building's revolving doors, letting the cool air wash over her face, and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from her roommate, probably wondering if she'd gotten the job. A text from the electric company reminding her that her bill was overdue. Hazel stared at the screen and allowed herself for just one moment to believe that everything might actually be okay. Then she walked into the rain, tilted her face toward the sky, and laughed, a bright, startled sound that disappeared into the noise of the city. Behind her, 43 floors up, Adrian Cole was already on the phone with Patricia, making good on a promise to a stranger. And in both their minds, the same thought turned over like a key in a lock. This is where it starts. Patricia Reeves called at 3:47 that afternoon, while Hazel was standing in the cereal aisle of a discount grocery store trying to calculate whether the generic brand would last her another week. The phone buzzed in her coat pocket, and she almost didn't answer. Unknown number, probably another debt collector. But something made her swipe to accept. "Miss Quinn, this is Patricia Reeves from Cole Enterprises." Hazel's hand tightened around a box of cornflakes. "Yes. Hello. I understand you met with Mr. Cole this morning. He speaks highly of you." Patricia's voice was brisk but not unkind. "I have a position available in our client relations department, junior liaison. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. And if you perform well, there's room to grow. 90-day probationary period. Benefits start after 60 days. Can you start Monday?" Hazel set the cereal box down carefully, afraid her shaking hands would drop it. "Yes, absolutely." "Good. Come in at 8. Ask for me at reception. We'll get you set up." Patricia paused. "Miss Quinn, I'm going to be honest with you. Adrian Cole doesn't usually call me and ask me to bend hiring protocols. The fact that he did means he sees something in you. Don't make him regret it." "I won't," Hazel said, her voice steadier than her pulse. "See you Monday." The line went dead. Hazel stood in the fluorescent glare of the grocery store, surrounded by strangers pushing carts and comparing prices, and felt tears slide hot down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She just stood there, holding her phone, letting the relief crash over her in waves. A woman passing by touched her arm gently. "You okay, honey?" Hazel nodded, laughing through the tears. "I just got a job." The woman smiled, squeezed her shoulder, and moved on. Hazel bought the generic cereal and walked home through the drizzle, and for the first time in months, the city felt like it might actually have room for her in it. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Hazel stood outside the Cole Enterprises building at 7:45, watching the river of professionals flow through the glass doors. She'd ironed her suit twice, polished her scuffed shoes until they almost looked new, and rehearsed introducing herself in the mirror until the words stopped sounding strange. Now, standing on the threshold, she felt the weight of what was about to begin. This wasn't just a job. This was her last chance to prove that hard work mattered more than luck, that someone from nowhere could build something that lasted. She walked inside. The reception area was sleek and modern, all glass and brushed steel. Behind the desk sat a young man with perfect hair and a practiced smile. "Good morning. Welcome to Cole Enterprises. I'm Hazel Quinn. I'm here to see Patricia Reeves." He typed something into his computer, then handed her a temporary badge. 38th floor. She's expecting you." Hazel clipped the badge to her lapel and headed for the elevators. This time, she knew exactly where she was going. Patricia's office was smaller than Adrian's, but no less efficient. Walls lined with filing cabinets, a desk covered in organized stacks of paper, and a woman in her early 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She stood when Hazel entered and extended her hand. "Miss Quinn, on time. Good start." Patricia gestured to a chair. "Sit. We have a lot to cover." For the next 2 hours, Patricia walked Hazel through the structure of the client relations department, the company's key accounts, and the expectations for her role. Junior liaison meant she would be the bridge between clients and the internal teams, handling communication, managing schedules, troubleshooting problems before they escalated. It was detail work, invisible work, the kind of labor that only got noticed when it wasn't done. "You'll be working with a team of 4, Patricia explained, sliding a folder across the desk. "These are their profiles. Simon handles our tech sector clients. Rachel works with hospitality. Marcus covers manufacturing. And Jennifer manages our financial services accounts. You'll float between them, providing support wherever it's needed." Hazel scanned the profiles. All 4 team members had years of experience, graduate degrees, polished LinkedIn photos. She looked up. "Where do I fit?" "Wherever there's a gap," Patricia said bluntly. "Simon's brilliant but disorganized. Rachel's great with clients but terrible with paperwork. Marcus is efficient but cold. Jennifer's overworked. Your job is to make their jobs easier. Think of yourself as the oil in the machine. You keep everything running smooth." "And if I don't?" Patricia's expression didn't change. "Then the 90 days ends at 90 days and we part ways professionally. But if you do? If you prove you can handle the chaos and keep people happy? Then we talk about what comes next." Hazel nodded slowly. "I understand." "Good. Now, let's get you set up." Patricia led Hazel down a hallway to an open-plan workspace filled with desks, computers, and the low hum of productivity. Heads turned as they entered, curious glances, quick assessments. Patricia stopped at a desk near the window, empty except for a computer and a phone. "This is yours. Computer login is taped under the keyboard. Passwords expire every 90 days, so mark your calendar. Any questions? Ask. But try to figure things out on your own first. We value initiative here." "Thank you," Hazel said. Patricia studied her for a moment. "You're nervous, that's fine. Everyone is on their first day. But here's some free advice. Don't try to make friends right away. Do your job well, and respect will follow. Try to be liked before you're respected, and you'll get neither." Then she was gone, her heels clicking efficiently back toward her office. Hazel stood alone at her new desk, aware of eyes still on her. She sat down, peeled the login information from under the keyboard, and booted up the computer. While it loaded, she looked around the room. At the desk nearest hers sat a woman in her 30s with auburn hair pulled into a tight bun, Jennifer, according to the profile. She was on a phone call, her voice clipped and professional, a spreadsheet open on her screen. Across the aisle, a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses was typing furiously, barely blinking, Simon. 2 desks down, Rachel was laughing at something on her phone, her workspace decorated with photos and motivational quotes. And in the far corner, Marcus sat with perfect posture, reviewing a contract with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond. None of them looked at Hazel. None of them acknowledged her presence. She logged in and opened her email. 17 messages already, all from Patricia. Meeting schedules, client briefs, protocol documents. Hazel started reading. By lunch, she'd absorbed the basics. By mid-afternoon, she'd reorganized her inbox into folders and color-coded her calendar. By 4 o'clock, Simon dropped a stack of papers on her desk without looking at her. "These need to be filed by end of day. Alphabetical by company name, then chronological. Don't mix up the dates." He walked away before she could respond. Hazel looked at the stack. At least 60 documents, some creased, some coffee-stained, all out of order. She checked the clock. 2 hours until 5. She pulled the papers toward her and started sorting. At 5:30, when most of the office had emptied out, Hazel placed the completed files on Simon's desk, perfectly organized, each document smoothed and straightened. She left a sticky note on top. Done. Let me know if you need anything else. Simon wasn't there to see it. But the next morning when Hazel arrived at 7:50, there was a coffee on her desk, plain black, still hot, and a note in return. Thanks. You're faster than the last 3 people who tried. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd received in weeks. The days blurred into a rhythm. Hazel arrived early and left late, absorbing the patterns of the office like a language. She learned that Rachel liked her reports summarized in bullet points, that Marcus needed everything cross-referenced, that Jennifer responded better to texts than emails, and that Simon would forget to eat lunch unless someone reminded him. She didn't push herself into conversations. She didn't try to charm or impress. She just watched, listened, and quietly made herself useful. On her 10th day, Jennifer's computer crashed in the middle of a client presentation. Hazel was walking past her desk when she heard the strangled curse. Everything okay? Hazel asked. Jennifer's face was pale. I have a video call in 5 minutes with our biggest account, and my entire screen just went black. It won't answer, and I don't have time to. Use my desk, Hazel said immediately. I'll pull up your files on my computer. You take the call from there. Jennifer stared at her. You do that? Of course. Come on. They switched places. Hazel logged Jennifer into her system, pulled up the presentation files from the shared drive, and stepped back. Jennifer took a breath, composed herself, and answered the video call with a smile that betrayed nothing of the panic from 30 seconds earlier. Hazel watched from a distance as Jennifer navigated the presentation smoothly, referencing slides and answering questions with the ease of someone who'd done this 100 times. When the call ended 20 minutes later, Jennifer exhaled and looked at Hazel with something close to gratitude. You just saved my career. You would have figured it out, Hazel said. Maybe, but you made it easier. Jennifer stood and extended her hand. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself properly before. I'm Jennifer. Hazel. I know. Jennifer smiled faintly. Everyone knows. You're the one Adrian Cole personally hired. Hazel felt her stomach tighten. People are talking about that? People are always talking about something. Don't let it bother you. Jennifer lowered her voice. For what it's worth, I don't care how you got here. You just proved you can handle pressure. That matters more than where you came from. It was a small moment, barely worth noting in the grand scheme of the workday. But Hazel felt something shift, a door opening, just slightly. 2 weeks later, the entire department gathered for a client strategy meeting. Patricia stood at the head of the conference table, flanked by Simon, Rachel, Marcus, and Jennifer. Hazel sat at the far end taking notes, trying to make herself invisible. The client in question was a mid-sized hotel chain looking to expand their marketing reach. Rachel had been managing the account for 6 months, but results were stagnant. Patricia wasn't happy. We've invested significant resources into this partnership, Patricia said, her tone glacial. And we're seeing minimal return. Rachel, walk me through the current strategy. Rachel stood, clicking through a presentation on the screen behind her. She talked about social media engagement, influencer partnerships, targeted ad campaigns, all the standard plays. Her delivery was polished, her slides professional. But Hazel, watching from the end of the table, noticed something Rachel hadn't said. There was no mention of the actual guests, no data on who was staying at these hotels, why they chose them, what they valued. The entire strategy was built on assumptions about what should work, not what the customers actually wanted. Hazel kept her mouth shut. This wasn't her meeting. She was here to observe, not contribute. But when Rachel finished and sat down, Patricia turned to the room. Thoughts? Simon shrugged. Seems solid. Maybe we need to increase the ad spend. Marcus shook his head. The ROI doesn't justify more spending. We need better targeting. Jennifer tapped her pen against her notepad. I think the issue is brand perception. The hotels aren't differentiated enough. We're selling the same story as everyone else. Patricia's gaze swept the table and landed unexpectedly on Hazel. Miss Quinn, you've been quiet, Any observations? Every head turned toward her. Hazel's pulse spiked, but she kept her voice steady. May I ask a question? Patricia nodded. Do we have any data on guest feedback? Reviews, surveys, comment cards? Anything that tells us why people choose these hotels in the first place? Rachel frowned. We have review aggregates, but that's not really marketing data. It is, though, Hazel said carefully. If we know what guests actually value, whether it's location, price, amenities, service, we can build a strategy around what they're already responding to, instead of guessing what might work. The room was silent. Patricia leaned forward slightly. Continue. Hazel took a breath. I looked at some of the public reviews last night, just out of curiosity. The common thread wasn't luxury or exclusivity, it was consistency. Guests kept saying they chose these hotels because they knew exactly what to expect. Clean rooms, reliable service, no surprises. That's the brand. That's what we should be amplifying. Marcus tilted his head, reassessing her. That's actually insightful. Rachel looked less convinced. But consistency isn't exciting. It doesn't grab attention. Excitement fades, Hazel said quietly. Trust doesn't. If we position these hotels as the reliable choice, the place you can count on when you're traveling for work or family, when you just need things to go smoothly, that's a message that resonates long term. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. Then she looked at Rachel. Pull the guest data, all of it. I want a full analysis by end of week. Miss Quinn, you'll assist her. Rachel's expression flickered, surprise, then something harder to read. Of course. The meeting adjourned. As everyone filed out, Jennifer caught Hazel's arm in the hallway. Nice work in there, she said quietly. I probably overstepped, Hazel murmured. No, you saw something everyone else missed. That's not overstepping, that's doing the job. Jennifer paused. Just be careful. Not everyone likes it when the new person has good ideas. Hazel glanced back toward the conference room, where Rachel was gathering her things with sharp, precise movements. I wasn't trying to make her look bad. I know, but intention doesn't always matter. Jennifer squeezed her arm. Just keep your head down and keep doing good work. It'll even out. That night, Hazel stayed late, pulling guest reviews and feedback reports from the hotel chain's database. She sorted them by category: location, cleanliness, service, amenities, value, and looked for patterns. What she found confirmed her instinct. The hotels weren't winning on flash or luxury. They were winning on predictability, on being exactly what their website promised. She compiled the data into a clean visual report and emailed it to Rachel before she left at 9. Rachel didn't respond that night, or the next morning. But 2 days later, she stopped by Hazel's desk with a printout of the report in hand. This is good work, Rachel said, her tone neutral. Thank you. Patricia wants us to present the revised strategy next week. You'll co-present with me. Hazel looked up, surprised. Are you sure? Rachel's smile was tight. You did half the work. You should get half the credit. Besides, Patricia asked for you specifically. There was something unspoken in that statement. Resentment, maybe, or wariness. But Rachel didn't say it out loud, and Hazel didn't push. I appreciate the opportunity, Hazel said. Rachel nodded and walked away, her heels sharp against the floor. The presentation the following week went smoothly. Hazel spoke for less than 5 minutes, walking through the data and the proposed pivot in messaging. Rachel handled the creative execution, outlining ad concepts and campaign visuals. Together, they made a compelling case. Patricia approved the strategy on the spot. Afterward, as the team dispersed, Simon lingered near Hazel's desk. You know people are starting to notice you, right? Hazel glanced up. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Simon grinned. Depends on who's noticing. Patricia likes you. That's good. Some of the others? He trailed off, shrugging. Let's just say not everyone appreciates someone new coming in and shaking things up. I'm not trying to shake anything up, Hazel said. I'm just trying to do my job. Yeah, well, sometimes that's the same thing. Simon tapped her desk twice and walked off, whistling tunelessly. Hazel sat alone, staring at her computer screen, and wondered if Jennifer had been right. Maybe good work wasn't enough. Maybe visibility came with its own cost. But she didn't have the luxury of worrying about office politics. She had 61 days left in her probationary period, and every single one of them mattered. So she kept her head down. She kept doing the work. And she kept proving, one small task at a time, that Adrian Cole's gamble hadn't been a mistake. 3 floors above, in his corner office, Adrian received an email from Patricia with the subject line, "Update on H. Quinn." He opened it. "She's good, Adrian. Better than I expected. Smart, observant, and she doesn't waste time trying to manage perceptions. The team is starting to respect her, even if they don't all like her yet. You made the right call." Adrian read the message twice, then closed his laptop and looked out at the city. The rain had returned, softer this time, misting the glass. He thought about the young woman who'd walked into the wrong interview and changed the trajectory of his day. He thought about his son, Owen, who would ask him tonight at dinner what interesting thing had happened at work. And Adrian realized, for the first time in 3 years, he had an answer that didn't feel hollow. Something good was happening, something small and quiet and real. He just hoped it would be enough. The shift happened gradually, like winter giving way to spring, not in a single moment, but in 1,000 small thaws that accumulated into something undeniable. By her 40th day at Cole Enterprises, Hazel had stopped feeling like an outsider passing through and started feeling like a piece of the infrastructure itself. People no longer introduced her as the new hire. They simply said her name. But with familiarity came scrutiny. The trouble started on a Wednesday morning in late October, when Patricia called an emergency department meeting. Hazel arrived at the conference room to find the entire team already seated, their faces tense. Patricia stood at the head of the table, her expression carved from stone. "We have a problem," Patricia said without preamble. "Donovan Industries. They're threatening to pull their contract." The room went silent. Donovan Industries was one of Cole Enterprises' oldest and most valuable clients, a manufacturing giant that generated nearly 15% of the company's annual revenue. Losing them would be more than a setback. It would be a crisis. Marcus cleared his throat. "What happened?" "Miscommunication," Patricia said, the word sharp as a blade. "They requested a detailed quarterly report 3 weeks ago. It was supposed to be delivered yesterday. It wasn't. Now their CEO is questioning whether we're capable of handling their account, and they're taking meetings with our competitors." Rachel's face had gone pale. "I was supposed to coordinate that report." "I know." Patricia's gaze didn't waver. "Which is why I'm asking you now. Where is it?" Rachel's hands gripped the edge of the table. "I delegated the data collection to Simon. He was supposed to have it to me by last Friday." All eyes turned to Simon, whose face flushed red. "I sent you the raw data. You were supposed to compile it into the final report." "You sent me incomplete data," Rachel shot back. "Half the metrics were missing. I asked you to fill in the gaps and you never responded." "Because I was in back-to-back client meetings all week. You knew that." Patricia held up one hand and the room fell silent again. "I don't care whose fault it is. I care about solutions. We have until Friday to deliver a report that convinces Donovan we're worth keeping." "That's 2 days. Can it be done?" Rachel and Simon exchanged a look that contained 3 years of accumulated tension. Neither answered. Patricia's jaw tightened. "Miss Quinn," Hazel's head snapped up. "Yes?" "You've been quiet. Do you have thoughts?" Hazel hesitated, acutely aware that whatever she said next would matter. She glanced at Rachel, whose expression had gone carefully blank, and then at Simon, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I think," Hazel said slowly, "that the issue isn't the data or the timeline. It's the handoff. When responsibilities get passed between people without clear checkpoints, things fall through the cracks. It's no one's fault. It's a process problem." Patricia leaned back slightly. "And how would you fix it?" Hazel took a breath. "Let me coordinate the report. I'll pull the data directly from Simon, work with Rachel on the formatting and narrative, and build in checkpoints so everyone knows exactly where we are at every stage. If we divide the work into chunks and tackle it in parallel instead of sequentially, we can have a draft by tomorrow afternoon and a polished version by Friday morning." The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Then Marcus spoke, his voice measured. "That could work, if someone manages the workflow tightly." Jennifer nodded. "Hazel's good at that. I've seen her coordinate 3 projects at once without dropping a thread." Patricia looked at Rachel. "Your account. Your call." Rachel's expression was unreadable, but her voice was steady. Let's do it. Hazel, you'll lead the coordination. Simon, get her everything she needs by end of day. I'll handle the narrative and client-facing sections. Good, Patricia said. I want updates every 6 hours. No surprises. If this goes sideways, it's on all of you. Dismissed. The team filed out in silence. Hazel gathered her things and headed back to her desk, her mind already running through the logistics. She had 2 days to pull off something that normally took 2 weeks, and if she failed, Donovan Industries would walk, and her probationary period would end exactly the way everyone had predicted, with her gone and forgotten. No pressure. Simon appeared at her desk 10 minutes later carrying a flash drive. Here's everything I have. It's messy, but it's all there. Thank you, Hazel said, taking it. I'll need about an hour to sort through it. Can we meet at noon to go over what's missing? Simon nodded. Yeah. And Hazel? I'm sorry you got pulled into this. It's fine. We'll figure it out. He managed a weak smile and walked away. Hazel plugged in the flash drive and opened the files. Simon hadn't been exaggerating. The data was a disaster. Spreadsheets with inconsistent formatting, missing labels, figures that didn't match across documents. She pulled up a blank spreadsheet and started rebuilding everything from scratch, cross-referencing numbers, filling gaps, color-coding sections. By noon, she had a skeleton structure. Simon arrived exactly on time, and they spent 45 minutes working through the missing metrics. He pulled reports from his email archives, dug up old client notes, and called contacts in Donovan's procurement department to verify figures. Hazel documented everything in real time, updating the master spreadsheet as they went. At 2 o'clock, she sent the clean data to Rachel with a note. Foundation is solid, ready for you to build the narrative. Let me know if you need anything clarified. Rachel responded within minutes. Got it. I'll have a draft by tonight. Hazel leaned back in her chair, her shoulders tight with tension. Across the office, Jennifer caught her eye and gave her a small thumbs up. Hazel returned it, grateful for the silent encouragement. That night, Hazel stayed until nearly midnight, refining charts and double-checking calculations. When she finally left the building, the streets were empty except for a few late-night cabs and the occasional delivery truck. She walked to the train station, her breath fogging in the cold air, and allowed herself a single moment of doubt. What if this didn't work? What if she'd overestimated her ability to hold all the pieces together? What if Rachel's draft came back incomplete, or Simon's data turned out to be flawed, or Donovan Industries decided they were done with Cole Enterprises no matter what report landed on their desk? Hazel shook her head, dispelling the thoughts. Doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had work to do. The next morning, Rachel's draft was waiting in Hazel's inbox. Hazel read through it twice, impressed despite herself. Rachel had taken the raw data and woven it into a story. Donovan Industries wasn't just a client, they were a partner whose growth had been supported and amplified by Cole Enterprises' strategic interventions. The narrative was compelling, the tone confident without being arrogant, but there were gaps, sections where Rachel had flagged questions or requested additional data. Hazel pulled up her notes and started filling them in, one by one. By noon, she had a complete draft. She sent it to both Rachel and Simon. First full draft attached. Review and send me edits by 5 o'clock. We'll compile the final version tonight. Rachel responded first. Looks strong. I'll tighten the executive summary. Simon sent a thumbs up emoji. At 5:30, they gathered in a small conference room, Hazel, Rachel, Simon, and Jennifer, who'd volunteered to proofread. They projected the report on the screen and went through it section by section, refining language, adjusting charts, catching typos. The work was meticulous and exhausting, but there was a rhythm to it, a sense of shared purpose that Hazel hadn't felt since her nonprofit days. Around 8 o'clock, Rachel pushed back from the table and rubbed her eyes. I think we're done. This is good, really good, Simon nodded. Donovan would be insane to walk away after seeing this. Jennifer grinned. And if they do, we'll send them a bill for emotional damages. Hazel allowed herself a small smile. I'll format the final PDF and send it to Patricia for approval. If she signs off, we'll deliver it to Donovan first thing tomorrow. Rachel stood and looked at Hazel directly for the first time all day. You held this together. We would have crashed and burned without you. It wasn't effusive praise, but coming from Rachel, it felt like a treaty. Hazel met her gaze. We all did our part. Yeah, Rachel said quietly, but you made sure the parts fit. They filed out of the conference room, and Hazel returned to her desk to finalize the PDF. She worked in silence, adjusting margins and compressing images until the document was perfect. Then she sent it to Patricia with a subject line that felt like a prayer. Donovan report ready for review. Patricia's response came at 9:47. Approved. Well done. Deliver it at 8 a.m. sharp. Hazel exhaled and shut down her computer. The office was empty now. The lights dimmed, the city glittering through the windows. She gathered her coat and bag and walked to the elevator, feeling the weight of the last 2 days settle into her bones. The next morning, Rachel and Hazel arrived at Donovan Industries headquarters together. The meeting was brief and professional. They presented the report to Donovan's chief operating officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Cross, who read through it in silence while they waited. Finally, Margaret looked up. This is thorough. More than I expected, given the timeline. Rachel kept her expression neutral. We take our partnerships seriously. Margaret's gaze shifted to Hazel. You're new. I don't recognize you from previous meetings. Hazel Quinn, Hazel said evenly. Junior liaison. I coordinated the report. Coordinated, Margaret repeated, and something in her tone suggested she understood exactly what that meant. Well, Miss Quinn, your coordination just saved your company's contract. We'll be staying with Cole Enterprises, but I expect this level of attention moving forward. You'll have it, Rachel said. Margaret stood, signaling the end of the meeting. They shook hands, and Hazel and Rachel walked out together, neither speaking until they were back in the elevator. Then Rachel let out a long breath. We actually pulled that off. Yeah, Hazel said, we did. Rachel looked at her, and for the first time there was no wariness in her expression, just respect. I misjudged you when you started. I thought you were here because Adrian felt sorry for you. I was wrong. Hazel didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. You're good at this, Rachel continued. Really good, and I'm glad you're on the team. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped out into the lobby. Rachel headed toward her car, but Hazel lingered, looking up at the Donovan Industries building, and felt something settle inside her chest. She'd done it. She'd proven she could handle the pressure. And for the first time since walking into Adrian Cole's office by mistake, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she belonged here. Back at Cole Enterprises, Patricia was waiting when Hazel and Rachel returned. She didn't smile, Patricia never smiled, but there was approval in her eyes. Donovan staying, Patricia said. Margaret called me personally to compliment the report. She mentioned you, Miss Quinn, said you impressed her. Hazel felt her face warm. It was a team effort. I'm sure it was. But leadership is about making sure the team effort actually produces results. You did that. Patricia handed Hazel a slim folder. This is your 60-day review. Normally, we'd wait until the end of your probation, but given your performance, I'm recommending we move you to permanent status early. Adrian will make the final call, but I don't anticipate any issues. Hazel took the folder, barely processing the words. Thank you. Patricia nodded once and walked away, her heels clicking efficiently down the hall. Rachel nudged Hazel's shoulder. Congratulations. You just went from probationary to permanent in 60 days. That's unheard of. Is it? Most people barely survive the full 90. You just lapped everyone. Rachel grinned. Enjoy it. You earned it. But as Hazel returned to her desk and opened the review folder, she felt a flicker of unease. Moving to permanent status meant she'd be here for the long haul. It meant this wasn't just a job anymore. It was a career. And with that came expectations, scrutiny, and the very real possibility that the higher she climbed, the harder she could fall. She thought of her old nonprofit, the families they'd helped, the program that had collapsed when the funding disappeared. She thought of all the people she'd worked with over the years who'd started with hope and ended with nothing. And she thought of Adrian Cole, the man who'd taken a chance on her when he had no reason to. She couldn't let him down. She couldn't let any of them down. So she closed the folder, opened her email, and got back to work. 3 floors up, Adrian was reviewing the same 60-day report when his phone buzzed. It was a text from his son's school. Early dismissal today due to heating issues. Owen is ready for pickup. Adrian checked the time, 2:45. He had a meeting at 3, but it could be rescheduled. He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator, already mentally shifting into father mode. 20 minutes later, he pulled up to the private academy where Owen attended 2nd grade. His son was waiting on the front steps, bundled in a blue jacket. his backpack nearly as big as he was. When Owen spotted Adrian's car, his face lit up. "Dad!" Owen scrambled into the back seat and buckled himself in. "You're early." "Did work end?" "Not exactly," Adrian said, pulling away from the curb. "But sometimes things are more important than meetings." Owen nodded seriously as if this made perfect sense. "Like when the heater breaks." "Exactly." Adrian glanced in the rearview mirror. "How was school?" "Good. We learned about fractions. Mrs. Jensen said I'm really good at dividing things into equal parts." Owen paused. "Can we stop for hot chocolate?" Adrian smiled. "Sure, but then you have homework, right?" "Just reading. I can do it fast." They stopped at a small cafe near the lake, and Adrian ordered 2 hot chocolates, one for Owen, one for himself, even though he rarely drank sweet things. They sat at a table by the window, watching people hurry past in the afternoon cold. "Dad?" Owen said, stirring his drink with a spoon. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why do you work so much?" The question caught Adrian off guard. He set down his cup carefully. "What do you mean?" Owen shrugged, his small face thoughtful. "You're always at the office. And when you're home, you're on your computer. I just wondered why." Adrian felt something tighten in his chest. He'd built his company, built his fortune, built this entire life around the idea of providing for Owen, giving him stability, opportunity, a future free from worry. But somewhere along the way, he'd confused providing with being present. "I work a lot," Adrian said slowly, "because I want to make sure you have everything you need. A good school, a safe home, a future where you can do anything you want." Owen nodded, but his expression was uncertain. "But what if what I need is just you?" The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. He reached across the table and took Owen's hand. "You're right. I've been working too much. I'm going to do better, okay? More nights at home. More days like this." Owen's face brightened. "Really?" "Really." They finished their hot chocolate in comfortable silence, and Adrian felt something shift inside him, a recalibration of priorities, a reminder that the empire he'd built meant nothing if it cost him the one person who mattered most. As they drove home, Owen chattered about his friends and his teacher and a science project he wanted to do on volcanoes. Adrian listened, really listened, and wondered how many conversations like this he'd missed while buried in spreadsheets and strategy meetings. When they got home, Owen ran inside to start his homework, and Adrian stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the house. It was beautiful, expensive, perfect. But it had always felt too quiet, too empty, like a stage set waiting for a play that never started. His phone buzzed, a message from Patricia. "Hazel Quinn's 60-day review is on your desk. Recommend early promotion to permanent status. Your call." Adrian read the message twice, then looked up at the house where his son was sitting at the kitchen table, probably already halfway through his reading assignment. He thought about Hazel Quinn, the young woman who'd walked into the wrong interview and somehow walked into exactly where she needed to be. He thought about the Donovan report, the crisis averted, the quiet competence she brought to everything she touched. And he thought about what Owen had just asked him. What if what I need is just you? Maybe the best thing Adrian could do for his company and for his son was to build a team strong enough that he didn't have to carry everything alone. Maybe Hazel Quinn wasn't just good for Cole Enterprises. Maybe she was the first step toward Adrian finally finding balance. He texted Patricia back, "Approved, make it official, and clear my calendar tomorrow afternoon. I'm taking my son to the aquarium." Patricia's response was immediate. "About time." Adrian smiled, pocketed his phone, and walked inside to find Owen sprawled on the floor, reading a book about dinosaurs with the kind of intense focus Adrian recognized in himself. "Hey, buddy," Adrian said, sitting down beside him. "How would you like to skip school tomorrow afternoon and go see the aquarium?" Owen's eyes went wide. "Really? On a school day?" "Really. Sometimes the best lessons happen outside the classroom." Owen launched himself at Adrian, wrapping small arms around his neck. "You're the best dad ever." Adrian held his son close and felt, for the first time in years, like maybe he was finally starting to get something right. The promotion became official on a gray November morning that tasted like snow. Hazel arrived at her desk to find a new nameplate waiting, polished brass with her name engraved in clean serif font. Beside it sat a handwritten note from Patricia. Permanent status approved, well earned, don't get comfortable. Hazel ran her fingers over the engraving and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Security. Not wealth, not comfort, but the simple knowledge that she had a place to stand that wouldn't disappear overnight. She tucked the note into her desk drawer next to the temporary badge from her first day and got to work. The rhythm of the office had shifted around her. People no longer questioned her presence or second-guessed her decisions. When she walked into meetings, chairs were already saved for her. When she sent emails, responses came quickly and without pushback. Simon had started bringing her coffee without being asked. Jennifer invited her to lunch at least twice a week. Even Marcus, who rarely spoke to anyone unless required, had begun stopping by her desk to ask her opinion on client strategies. Rachel remained the most complicated relationship. They worked well together now, built on mutual respect rather than warmth, but there was still a careful distance between them. Hazel understood it. Rachel had been with the company for 5 years, had climbed every rung deliberately, and then watched a stranger arrive and earn in 2 months what had taken Rachel 2 years. Professionalism could coexist with resentment. Hazel didn't take it personally, but the real change happened in spaces Hazel didn't see. In the executive suite, Adrian had started asking questions he'd never bothered with before. During strategy meetings, he'd lean forward and ask, "What would the client actually want?" Instead of, "What will maximize our margins?" He stayed later some evenings, not to work, but to walk through the open plan offices and observe how his teams functioned. He noticed which departments communicated smoothly and which ones operated in silos. He saw where frustration lived, where burnout was brewing, where talented people were being underutilized. And he kept coming back to the same thought. Hazel Quinn had entered his company by accident and had quietly begun showing him what he'd lost sight of. Not through grand gestures or pointed criticisms, but simply by doing her work with a kind of intentional care that had become rare in his world. One afternoon in mid-November, Adrian stopped by Patricia's office unannounced. "Do you have a minute?" he asked from the doorway. Patricia looked up from a budget report, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "For you? Always. Come in." Adrian closed the door and sat across from her. "I want to talk about Hazel Quinn." Patricia set down her pen. "What about her?" "I've been watching how the department's changed since she arrived. The Donovan crisis got resolved faster and more effectively than it should have. Team morale is higher. People are collaborating instead of competing. And from what I can tell, a lot of that traces back to her." "She's good," Patricia agreed. "Better than good. She has instincts most people don't develop until they've been in the industry for a decade." "So why is she still a junior liaison?" Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Because she's been here 72 days, Adrian. Promoting her again this quickly would cause problems. People already whisper that she got special treatment because you personally hired her. If we move her up too fast, it'll look like favoritism, and that'll undermine everything she's accomplished." Adrian rubbed his jaw, frustrated because he knew Patricia was right. "So what do we do? Just let her keep doing work that's 3 levels above her pay grade?" "For now? Yes. Give her 6 months. Let her build credibility that can't be questioned. Then we promote her properly, with a title and salary that match her contributions." Patricia paused. "In the meantime, we can give her more responsibility without changing her official role. Bigger projects, leadership opportunities, visibility with senior clients. She'll know she's valued, even if the org chart doesn't reflect it yet." Adrian nodded slowly. "That's fair, but I don't want her to burn out. I've seen what happens when talented people carry more than they should." "Then make sure she has support," Patricia said, "and maybe consider that the best thing you can do for Hazel Quinn is to fix the systems she's working around. She's covering gaps that shouldn't exist in the first place." The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Adrian had built a company that functioned efficiently but not sustainably. He'd optimized for profit without considering whether his people had what they needed to do their jobs well. Hazel had succeeded not because the system worked, but because she'd figured out how to work despite the system. "You're right," Adrian said quietly. "I need to look at this more carefully." Patricia smiled faintly. "You know what's funny? I've been telling you that for 2 years and you never listened. But one junior liaison shows up and suddenly you're rethinking everything. Maybe I needed to see it from the ground level instead of the 40th floor." Or maybe, Patricia said, her voice gentler than usual, you needed to see someone fight for something the way you used to before you had everything to lose. Adrian met her gaze and realized she was talking about more than just business. She was talking about the man he'd been before his wife died, before fear and grief had turned him into someone who controlled everything because he couldn't bear to lose anything else. I'm working on it, he said. I know you are. Patricia picked up her pen again, signaling the end of the conversation. Now get out of my office. I have budgets to balance. Adrian left, but the conversation stayed with him. That evening, instead of working late, he went home at 6 and found Owen building an elaborate Lego city on the living room floor. Dad! Owen looked up, surprised. You're home early again. I'm trying something new, Adrian said, loosening his tie and sitting down beside the sprawling construction. What are we building? A city with an aquarium in the middle, see? Owen pointed to a blue structure surrounded by tiny plastic trees. The fish can look out and see everything. Adrian smiled and picked up a handful of bricks. What else does it need? They worked together in comfortable silence, adding buildings and roads and parks. At some point, Owen leaned against Adrian's shoulder, his small hand still carefully placing windows on a tower. And Adrian felt the same thing he'd felt at the cafe, the terrifying, wonderful realization that he'd been chasing the wrong things. He thought of Hazel again, the way she worked not for recognition or advancement, but because the work itself mattered. She'd reminded him that success wasn't just about building something big. It was about building something that made people's lives better, including your own. Owen? Adrian said quietly. Yeah? Thank you for telling me I work too much. You were right, and I needed to hear it. Owen looked up at him, his eyes serious in a way that made him seem older than 7. It's okay, Dad. You're doing better now. I'm trying. I know. Owen went back to his Lego tower. That's what matters. The next week, Hazel was pulled into a meeting she hadn't expected. Patricia's assistant had sent the calendar invite with no context, just a time and a room number. When Hazel arrived, she found herself in a small conference room with Patricia, Adrian, and 2 senior executives she recognized but had never spoken to directly, David Chen, head of business development, and Miriam Foster, chief financial officer. Hazel's pulse quickened. This felt like the kind of meeting where careers either expanded or ended. Adrian gestured to an empty chair. Hazel, thanks for joining us. Sit, please. She sat, her hands folded carefully in her lap. We've been reviewing department performance, Adrian began, and we've noticed something interesting. Client satisfaction scores have increased by 12% in the last quarter. Internal collaboration metrics are up. Project completion times have improved. And when we trace the common factor across all these improvements, your name kept appearing. Hazel kept her expression neutral, even as her heart hammered. I've been doing my job. You've been doing more than that, Miriam said, her tone matter-of-fact. You've been identifying systemic inefficiencies and fixing them without being asked. That's not standard junior liaison work. David leaned forward. Here's what we're proposing. We're launching a new initiative, an internal consulting team that will work across departments to improve workflow, communication, and client relations. We want you to help build it. Hazel blinked. I'm sorry, what? You'll still report to Patricia, Adrian clarified. But you'll have the authority to pull people from different teams, assess processes, and recommend changes. Think of it as temporary project-based work, with the goal of scaling what you've been doing informally. Patricia added, it's a test. If the initiative works, it becomes permanent, and you'll lead it. If it doesn't, you return to your current role, no harm done. But either way, this is an opportunity to make a real impact. Hazel's mind raced. This was enormous. More responsibility than she'd imagined earning in her first year, let alone her first 3 months. It was also terrifying. Leading a cross-departmental initiative meant visibility, scrutiny, and the very real possibility of high-profile failure. But it was also exactly the kind of work she was good at, the kind that mattered. What's the timeline? Hazel asked. We'd start in January, David said. That gives you 6 weeks to finish out the year in your current role and transition responsibilities. The first project would be streamlining client onboarding. We've had complaints that the process is too slow and confusing. Fix that, and we'll greenlight the next phase. Hazel looked at each of them in turn, trying to read what they weren't saying. Can I ask you something? Adrian nodded. Of course. Why me? There are people here with more experience, more tenure, more credibility. Why take a chance on someone who's barely been here 90 days? It was Miriam who answered, her voice blunt but not unkind. Because everyone else is too embedded in the way things are. They've learned to work around problems instead of solving them. You haven't been here long enough to accept dysfunction as normal. That makes you valuable. Patricia's expression was unreadable. So? Are you interested? Hazel thought of the nonprofit that had collapsed, the families she couldn't help, the years of survival jobs that had led nowhere. She thought of walking into the wrong interview and finding, against all odds, a place where her skills actually mattered. I'm interested, she said, but I need one thing. Adrian raised an eyebrow. What's that? If I'm going to assess departments and recommend changes, I need people to trust that I'm not there to judge them or get them in trouble. I need to be able to promise that my job is to make their work easier, not to report back on who's failing. Adrian exchanged a glance with Patricia, then nodded. Fair. You'll have that authority. Your recommendations stay internal to the initiative unless there's a systemic issue that requires executive intervention. Deal? Hazel extended her hand across the table. Deal. Adrian shook it, his grip firm and steady. Welcome to the next phase, Miss Quinn. The meeting ended, and as the executives filed out, Patricia hung back. She waited until the door closed, then looked at Hazel with something close to pride. You handled that well. Asking for trust protections was smart. Most people would have just said yes and figured it out later. I've worked in enough places to know that authority without trust is useless, Hazel said. If people think I'm a spy for upper management, they'll hide problems instead of solving them. Exactly. Patricia's expression softened slightly. You're going to do well with this, Hazel. Just don't lose sight of why you're good at it. You care about people, not just processes. That's rare. After Patricia left, Hazel sat alone in the conference room, staring at the whiteboard where someone had sketched out an organizational chart. Her name wasn't on it yet, but it would be. She'd gone from unemployed to permanent to initiative lead in less than 4 months. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like standing at the base of a mountain, looking up at a climb she hadn't trained for. But she'd come this far by refusing to be paralyzed by doubt. So she stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked back to her desk to start planning. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Hazel spent her mornings doing her regular liaison work, and her afternoons meeting with department heads, shadowing teams, and mapping out the client onboarding process from first contact to contract signature. What she found was worse than she'd expected. 11 different handoffs, 4 redundant approval steps, and at least 3 places where information got lost or duplicated. No wonder clients complained. The system was a maze designed by people who'd never had to navigate it themselves. Hazel documented everything, built flowcharts, interviewed frustrated employees who were grateful someone was finally asking them what wasn't working. She filled notebooks with observations and ideas, working late into the evening, often the last person to leave the office. One Thursday night in early December, as she was packing up her desk around 9, she noticed lights still on in Adrian's office. On impulse, she walked down the hall and knocked softly on the open door. Adrian looked up from his laptop, surprised. Hazel, what are you still doing here? I could ask you the same question. He smiled faintly. Touché. Come in. Hazel stepped inside, struck again by the view, the city lights spreading out like a field of stars. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity with the initiative. I know it's a risk. It's not a risk if I'm confident it'll work, Adrian said. And I am. Why? Adrian closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. Do you remember what you told me in your interview, the real one, when you thought you were applying for the administrative coordinator position? Hazel thought back. I told you a lot of things. You said people don't just need services. They need someone to listen long enough to understand what they're actually asking for. Adrian's gaze was steady. That's what you've been doing here. Listening, understanding, and then fixing things because you actually care whether they work or not. That's not something you can teach, Hazel. Either someone has it or they don't. You do. Hazel felt warmth rise in her chest. I just want to be useful. You're more than useful. You're changing how this company operates, and you're reminding me why I started it in the first place. Adrian paused, then added quietly, My son asked me recently why I work so much. I didn't have a good answer, but watching you work, watching you find purpose in making things better instead of just making money, it's made me think about what I want him to learn from me. Hazel didn't know what to say to that. The vulnerability in Adrian's voice was unexpected, a glimpse of the person beneath the executive. He's lucky to have you, she said finally. I hope so. I'm trying to be better, present more, available more. It's harder than I thought it would be. The hardest things usually are. Hazel smiled softly. But from what I can tell, you're doing a good job. Your son sounds like a thoughtful kid. He is. Adrian's expression warmed. He made me stop and think about what actually matters, kind of like you did, actually. Seems like I needed both of you to remind me. The moment hung between them, something unspoken shifting in the air. Then Hazel glanced at the clock and stepped back toward the door. I should let you get back to work, or better yet, let you go home. Adrian laughed. You're right. Owen's been asking me to read him this book about explorers. I keep promising, and then I stay late and miss bedtime. So go, Hazel said gently. The work will be here tomorrow. He won't be 7 forever. Adrian stood, gathering his things. You're absolutely right. Thank you, Hazel. For what? For reminding me what's important, again. They walked to the elevator together, and as they descended through the building's gleaming floors, Hazel realized something had shifted. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She'd become something closer to a colleague, maybe even a trusted advisor. The distance between them had narrowed, not inappropriately, but genuinely. Two people who respected each other's work and saw value in each other's perspective. Outside, the December air was sharp and cold. Adrian's driver was waiting at the curb. He paused before getting in. Hazel, I know the next few months are going to be demanding. If you need anything, resources, support, someone to run interference with difficult departments, just ask. You have my full backing. Thank you. That means everything. He nodded and slid into the car. Hazel watched it pull away, then turned toward the train station, her breath fogging in the night air. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the wrong interview, the impossible odds, the quiet determination to prove she belonged. She thought about Owen asking his father why he worked so much, and Adrian actually listening, actually changing. And she thought about the initiative waiting for her in January, the chance to build something that would outlast her probationary period, her first year, maybe even her entire tenure at Cole Enterprises. For the first time in her life, Hazel wasn't just surviving. She was building. And it felt like everything she'd been working toward had finally aligned into something that looked like purpose. At home that night, in his son's bedroom, Adrian sat on the edge of Owen's bed and opened the book about explorers. Owen was already half asleep, but he snuggled closer when Adrian started reading. Dad? Owen murmured after a few pages. Yeah, buddy. You've been home more. I like it. Adrian set the book down and smoothed Owen's hair back from his forehead. Me too. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out. It's okay. You're here now. I am, and I'm going to keep being here. Owen's eyes drifted closed, and within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep. Adrian sat there for a while longer, just watching his son's peaceful face, and felt gratitude so fierce it bordered on pain. Hazel Quinn had walked into his office by mistake and somehow catalyzed a transformation he hadn't known he needed. She'd shown him that strength wasn't about control or distance or building walls high enough that nothing could hurt you. It was about showing up, doing the work that mattered, and trusting that care and competence were enough. He thought about the initiative they'd offered her, the responsibility they were placing on someone so new. It was a gamble, but then again, so was hiring her in the first place. And that gamble had already changed everything. January arrived with the kind of cold that made Chicago feel like a city carved from ice. Hazel stood at her apartment window on New Year's morning, watching frost patterns spread across the glass, and thought about everything that had changed in 4 months. She'd gone from unemployed to permanent to initiative lead. She'd proven herself to people who had every reason to doubt her, and now she was about to step into the most visible, most vulnerable position of her career. The client onboarding initiative launched on the second Monday of January. Hazel had assembled a small team, Simon for technical systems, a detail-oriented analyst named Kevin from operations, and surprisingly, Rachel, who'd volunteered to help with client-facing communications. They met in a conference room that would serve as their temporary headquarters, whiteboards already covered in Hazel's flowcharts and process maps. "All right," Hazel said, standing at the head of the table. "We have 3 months to rebuild the onboarding process from scratch. That means we need to move fast, but we also need to be thorough. Every department we touch is going to have opinions about how things should work. Our job is to listen to those opinions, find the patterns, and build something that actually serves the clients instead of just checking boxes for internal bureaucracy." Kevin looked up from his laptop. "What's our success metric? How do we know if this worked?" "3 things," Hazel said, ticking them off on her fingers. 1. Reduce the average onboarding time from 6 weeks to 3. 2. Eliminate at least half of the redundant approval steps. 3. Increase client satisfaction scores for the onboarding experience by 25%. If we hit all 3, the initiative gets greenlit for the next phase. Rachel whistled low. "Those are ambitious targets." "They are," Hazel agreed. "But they're also what we need to prove this matters. If we only make small improvements, people will say it wasn't worth the disruption. We need to make it impossible to ignore." Simon leaned back in his chair, grinning. "No pressure, then." "Exactly," Hazel smiled. "Let's get to work." The first 2 weeks were brutal. Hazel and her team interviewed dozens of employees across 6 departments, sitting through meetings where people vented years of frustration about systems that didn't work and processes that made their jobs harder. Some were grateful someone was finally asking. Others were defensive, worried that change meant more work or implied criticism of how they'd been doing things. Hazel navigated it all with patience that surprised even her. When a department head accused her of overstepping, she listened without interrupting, then calmly explained that her goal wasn't to assign blame, but to remove obstacles. When a junior employee broke down in tears describing how impossible it was to track client information across 3 different databases, Hazel handed her tissues and took detailed notes. When someone suggested a solution that wouldn't work, Hazel thanked them and gently explained why, offering alternative approaches instead of shutting them down. By the end of week 2, she had a clear picture of the problem. The onboarding process had been built piece by piece over a decade, with each department adding their own requirements without considering the cumulative burden on clients or staff. Nobody had stepped back to look at the whole system. Nobody had asked whether it made sense. Until now. Hazel spent a weekend locked in her apartment, building a new process from the ground up. She started with the client's perspective. What did they actually need to know and provide to get started? Then she worked backward, identifying which internal steps were essential and which were just legacy requirements that nobody had bothered to eliminate. She consolidated forms, automated repetitive tasks, and created a single point of contact for clients, instead of forcing them to navigate a maze of different departments. By Sunday night, she had a prototype. It wasn't perfect, but it was revolutionary, a streamlined pathway that cut onboarding time in half and reduced client touchpoints by 60%. Monday morning, she presented it to her team. Simon stared at the screen. Hazel, this is incredible. But you know half the departments are going to fight this, right? You're basically eliminating steps they've been doing for years." "I know," Hazel said, "which is why we're not going to ask for permission. We're going to run a pilot." Rachel looked up sharply. "A pilot? Without executive approval?" "Patricia gave me authority to test solutions," Hazel said. "That's what we're going to do. We'll take 3 incoming clients and run them through the new process. If it works, we have proof. If it doesn't, we revise and try again. But either way, we'll have real data instead of theoretical arguments." Kevin grinned. "You're going rogue. I like it." "I'm not going rogue," Hazel corrected. "I'm being practical. People resist change because they can't see it working. We're going to show them." They launched the pilot the next day. Hazel personally managed the first client, a small tech startup looking for business development support. She walked them through the new process, which took 3 days instead of 3 weeks. The client was thrilled. The second client, a hospitality group, had a similar experience. By the time the third client completed onboarding in record time, word was spreading through the company. But not everyone was happy about it. On a Thursday afternoon in late January, Hazel was called to Patricia's office. When she arrived, she found Patricia sitting with David Chen and another executive Hazel didn't recognize. A stern-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and an expression that suggested he'd built his career on saying no. "Hazel, this is Robert Dennison," Patricia said, her tone carefully neutral. "Senior VP of Operations. He has concerns about your initiative." Robert didn't wait for pleasantries. "Miss Quinn, I've been with this company for 18 years. I've seen a lot of young people come through with big ideas about how to fix things. Most of them crash and burn because they don't understand the complexity of what they're trying to change." Hazel sat down, keeping her expression calm. "I understand your concern, Mr. Dennison." "Do you?" Robert leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've bypassed multiple departments, eliminated approval processes that exist for legal and compliance reasons, and convinced 3 clients to participate in an unauthorized experiment. That's not innovation. That's recklessness." Hazel took a breath, forcing herself to stay composed. "May I ask which approval processes you're concerned about?" Robert rattled off 3 specific steps that Hazel had removed from the new onboarding flow. She'd anticipated this. "Those steps were redundant," Hazel said evenly. "The legal review in Step 4 covers the same ground as the compliance check in Step 7. I didn't eliminate oversight, I consolidated it. The clients still get the same level of protection, but they're not being asked to submit the same information twice to different departments who don't communicate with each other." "And who authorized you to make that determination?" "Patricia authorized me to assess and improve the process." "That's what I'm doing." Robert's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Miss Quinn, you've been here 4 months. You don't have the institutional knowledge to understand why these systems exist." "You're right," Hazel said, and the admission seemed to surprise him. "I don't have 18 years of history here, but sometimes that's exactly why I can see the problems. I'm not attached to the way things have always been done. I'm only attached to whether they work." David spoke up for the first time. "Robert, the pilot results are hard to argue with. 3 clients onboarded in less than a week, 0 compliance issues, and all 3 gave us perfect satisfaction scores. That's not recklessness, that's results." "Results that could expose us to liability if something was missed," Robert countered. Patricia's voice cut through the tension. "Then let's verify. Hazel, pull the compliance documentation for all 3 pilot clients. Robert, you review it personally. If there are gaps, we address them. If there aren't, we acknowledge that the new process works and discuss scaling it." Robert didn't look happy, but he nodded. "Fine, I want the files by end of day." "You'll have them in an hour," Hazel said. The meeting ended in cold silence. Hazel walked back to her desk, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She'd just gone toe-to-toe with a senior executive who clearly wanted her initiative to fail. If she couldn't produce flawless documentation, everything she'd built would collapse. Rachel appeared at her desk 5 minutes later. "I heard. Are you okay?" "I will be if I can find every piece of compliance paperwork from the last 2 weeks without missing a single signature." "I'll help," Rachel said immediately. "Kevin and Simon, too. We'll pull everything and cross-reference it against Robert's checklist." For the next 3 hours, the 4 of them worked in focused silence, assembling documentation, checking signatures, verifying dates. By 4:30, Hazel had a complete compliance packet for each pilot client, organized in labeled folders with a summary memo explaining how each requirement had been met. She delivered it to Robert's office herself. He took the folders without thanking her and gestured toward the door. "I'll review these tonight. You'll hear from me tomorrow." Hazel left, her stomach tight with anxiety. She'd done everything right, she was sure of it, but she also knew that people like Robert didn't oppose change because of facts. They opposed it because it threatened their sense of control. That night, Hazel barely slept. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, and wondered if she'd pushed too hard, too fast. Maybe Patricia had been right about needing more time to build credibility. Maybe she should have waited, played it safe, avoided making enemies in her first 6 months. But then she thought about the clients who'd been frustrated by the old system, the employees who'd been doing redundant work for years, and the opportunity she'd been given to actually fix something broken. No. She'd made the right call. She just had to trust that the work would speak for itself. The next morning, Robert called a meeting. Hazel, Patricia, David, and the entire initiative team gathered in the same conference room. Robert stood at the head of the table, the compliance folders stacked in front of him. I reviewed the documentation, Robert said, his tone neutral. Every requirement was met. No gaps, no shortcuts, no compliance issues. Hazel felt relief wash over her, but she kept her expression steady. Robert continued, and his voice softened slightly. I came into this meeting ready to shut down your initiative, Miss Quinn. I thought you were another inexperienced hire who didn't understand the stakes. But your work is thorough, your process is sound, and frankly, it's better than what we've been doing for years. He paused. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air, unexpected and genuine. Thank you, Hazel said quietly. That means a lot. Robert nodded to Patricia. Greenlight the next phase. Scale the new onboarding process company-wide, and give Miss Quinn the resources she needs to do it right. After the meeting, Patricia pulled Hazel aside in the hallway. You handled that perfectly. Robert doesn't apologize to anyone. The fact that he did tells me you've earned his respect. I just did the work, Hazel said. No, Patricia corrected. You did the work. And you stood your ground when someone powerful tried to intimidate you. That's leadership, Hazel. Don't downplay it. The initiative scaled over the next 6 weeks. Hazel and her team trained staff across every department, adjusted the process based on feedback, and monitored results religiously. By mid-March, the new onboarding system was fully operational, and the numbers spoke for themselves. Average onboarding time had dropped from 42 days to 19. Client satisfaction scores had increased by 31%, and internal staff reported feeling less overwhelmed and more effective. Adrian reviewed the final report in his office on a bright Thursday afternoon in late March. When he finished, he called Patricia. The initiative exceeded every target, he said, by a significant margin. I know, Patricia said. Hazel's already drafting proposals for the next 2 phases, improving client communication and streamlining contract renewals. How is she handling the workload? Better than most people with twice her experience. But Adrian, we need to talk about her compensation and title. She's doing director-level work on a junior liaison salary. That's not sustainable, and it's not fair. Agreed. Draft a promotion proposal, Director of Client Experience, market rate salary, full benefits, budget authority. I want it on my desk by Monday. Done. Patricia paused. She's special, Adrian. I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've never seen someone her age with this much emotional intelligence and strategic thinking. You made the right call hiring her. We both did, Adrian said. Let's make sure she knows we value her. The promotion came through in early April. Patricia delivered the news in person, handing Hazel a formal offer letter with a salary that was more than double what she'd been making. Hazel read it twice, her hands trembling. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Patricia said, smiling. You've earned it 10 times over. Yes, absolutely yes. That evening, Hazel walked through the city as the sun set, painting the buildings in shades of gold and amber. She stopped at the lakefront and looked out over the water, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she'd been standing in a grocery store trying to decide if she could afford cereal. Now she was a director at one of Chicago's most successful companies, leading initiatives that were changing how the entire organization operated. It should have felt like a dream. Instead, it felt earned. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Hazel, this is Adrian Cole. I wanted to congratulate you personally on your promotion. You've exceeded every expectation, and I'm grateful you walked into the wrong interview that day. You've changed this company. More importantly, you've reminded me what it looks like to lead with integrity. Thank you. Hazel read the message 3 times, her throat tight with emotion. She typed a response. Thank you for taking a chance on me. I won't forget it. His reply came quickly. I have a feeling you're going to do a lot more than we can imagine. Looking forward to seeing where you go from here. She pocketed her phone and turned back toward the city, the lights beginning to flicker on as night approached. 2 weeks later, Adrian was working late again, not because he had to, but because he'd scheduled a meeting with Hazel to discuss the next phase of her initiatives. Owen was at a friend's house for a sleepover, and Adrian had decided to use the rare, quiet evening productively. Hazel arrived at 7, carrying a folder thick with proposals and ideas. They sat in Adrian's office, the city spread out below them, and talked for 2 hours about where the company could go if they continued prioritizing people over processes. "I've been thinking about culture," Hazel said at one point. "We fix systems, but systems are only as good as the people using them. What if we created a program where employees at every level could pitch improvement ideas with a budget and support to test them?" Adrian leaned forward, intrigued, like an internal innovation fund. "Exactly. People on the ground see problems we never notice from the executive floor. If we give them the tools to solve those problems, we tap into collective intelligence instead of just top-down mandates." "I love it," Adrian said. "Draft a proposal. Let's make it happen." They talked until nearly 9, ideas building on ideas, both of them energized by the possibility of what they could create together. Finally, Hazel glanced at the clock and laughed. "I've kept you here way too long. I'm sorry." "Don't be. This is the most excited I've been about work in years." Adrian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "You know, when you first walked into my office, I almost sent you away. I had a full schedule, the interview was a mistake, and it would have been easier to just redirect you and move on." "What changed your mind?" Hazel asked. Adrian turned to face her. "You did. The way you carried yourself, the way you talked about work. It reminded me of why I started this company in the first place. I'd lost sight of that. You brought it back." Hazel felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'm glad I could help. But honestly, you did the hard part. You took a risk when you didn't have to." "It wasn't a risk," Adrian said quietly. "It was an instinct. And I'm learning to trust those again." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "My son told me recently that I'm home more now, and he likes it. I have you to thank for that too. You showed me that success isn't about how many hours you work. It's about whether the work matters and whether you're present for the people who need you." "That's a lesson I learned the hard way," Hazel said. "I spent years in survival mode, working multiple jobs, never sure if I'd make rent. It teaches you what actually matters pretty quickly. And what matters most to you now?" Hazel thought about it. "Building something that lasts. Not just for me, but for everyone involved. I want to look back in 10 years and see that the work we did here made people's lives genuinely better. Clients, employees, everyone." Adrian smiled. "Then we're aligned, because that's exactly what I want too." They said goodnight, and Hazel left the building feeling like she'd crossed some invisible threshold. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was a partner in shaping the company's future, trusted and valued in ways she'd never imagined possible when she walked into the wrong interview 6 months ago. Spring turned to summer. Hazel's Innovation Fund launched to overwhelming response, with employees across the company submitting ideas for improvements, large and small. The best proposals received funding and support, and within months, dozens of small changes were adding up to a noticeably better work environment. Morale increased, turnover decreased, client satisfaction reached all-time highs. And at the center of it all was Hazel Quinn, the woman who'd arrived by accident and stayed because she'd proven she belonged. One evening in July, Adrian picked Owen up from summer camp and took him out for ice cream. They sat on a bench near the lake, watching sailboats drift across the water. "Dad," Owen said, chocolate ice cream smeared across his chin. "Remember when you used to work all the time?" "I do." "Why?" "I'm glad you don't anymore. It's better now." Adrian wiped Owen's chin with a napkin and pulled him close. "Me too, buddy. Me too." "Is it because of the lady from work? The one you told me about?" Adrian smiled. "Hazel? Yeah, partly. She helped me remember what's important. Can I meet her sometime?" "Maybe. Would you like that?" Owen nodded enthusiastically. "She sounds nice." "She is," Adrian said. "Very nice." They finished their ice cream and walked home through the warm summer evening, Owen chattering about camp and friends and the science project he wanted to do about stars. Adrian listened, really listened, and felt gratitude for the second chance he'd been given, not just in business, but in life. Because Hazel Quinn hadn't just changed his company, she'd changed him. In September, nearly a year after Hazel's first day, Cole Enterprises held its annual company meeting. Adrian stood at the podium in front of 300 employees and talked about the year's successes: record growth, expanded client base, industry recognition. Then he paused and looked out at the crowd until he found Hazel, sitting near the middle with her team. "Before we wrap up," Adrian said, "I want to recognize someone who embodies everything this company stands for." A year ago, Hazel Quinn walked into the wrong interview. She was supposed to be 2 floors down, applying for an entry-level position. Instead, she ended up in my office, and I made a decision that day that changed everything. The room had gone quiet. Hazel's face flushed, but she kept her composure. Hazel didn't have connections or a prestigious resume, Adrian continued. What she had was integrity, intelligence, and a willingness to work harder than anyone else in the room. In less than a year, she's gone from junior liaison to director of client experience. She's led initiatives that have transformed how we operate. And most importantly, she's reminded all of us, myself included, that the best companies aren't built on profit margins alone. They're built on caring about people and doing work that actually matters. He gestured toward Hazel. "Would you stand, please?" Hazel stood, her heart pounding, as the entire room broke into applause. It wasn't polite corporate clapping. It was genuine, sustained, the kind of recognition that came from people who'd seen her work and respected it. When the applause finally faded, Adrian smiled. "Thank you, Hazel, for everything." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and sat down as the meeting continued. Afterward, people she'd never spoken to stopped her in the hallway to congratulate her. Simon hugged her. Rachel shook her hand with genuine warmth. Even Robert Dennison, the skeptical executive who'd nearly shut down her initiative, approached her with a smile. "You've made me rethink a lot of assumptions, Miss Quinn," he said. "Keep doing what you're doing." That night, Hazel sat in her apartment, not the same cramped studio she'd lived in a year ago, but a brighter, safer one-bedroom she could finally afford, and pulled out the old temporary badge from her first day. She set it next to her new business card. Hazel Quinn, Director of Client Experience. The distance between those 2 pieces of paper was measured in months, but it felt like a lifetime. Her phone buzzed. A text from Adrian. "Owen wants to know if you'd like to come to dinner sometime. No pressure, but he's been asking about you since I mentioned you at the meeting." Hazel smiled and typed back, "I'd love to, thank you." The response came quickly. "How about Saturday?" "Fair warning, he's going to ask you approximately 1 million questions about everything." "I can handle it," Hazel replied. "See you Saturday." That weekend, Hazel arrived at Adrian's house with a small gift for Owen, a puzzle of the solar system, since Adrian had mentioned his son's interest in stars. Owen answered the door, his eyes bright with curiosity. "You're Hazel," he announced. "And you're Owen," Hazel said, handing him the puzzle. "Your dad said you like space." Owen's face lit up. "This is so cool, Dad! Look!" Adrian appeared behind him, smiling. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." They ate together at the kitchen table, Owen peppering Hazel with questions about her work, her favorite books, whether she liked dogs or cats better, and what her favorite planet was. Hazel answered every question patiently, charmed by his enthusiasm. After dinner, while Owen worked on his puzzle in the living room, Adrian and Hazel stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunset. "Thank you for coming," Adrian said. "It means a lot. To both of us." "Thank you for inviting me," Hazel replied. "Owen's wonderful." "He is, and he likes you, which is good, because you've become pretty important to both of us." Hazel looked at him, surprised by the openness in his voice. "I'm just glad I could help." "You did more than help, Hazel. You changed everything." Adrian's gaze was steady and warm. "That day you walked into my office, I was going through the motions, building a company, raising my son, but not really living. You reminded me what it means to care about something beyond just getting through the day. That's a gift I can't repay." "You already did," Hazel said softly. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw something in me I wasn't sure I still had. That changed my life." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky, and both of them understood that what had started as a mistake had become something far more valuable, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the belief that people mattered more than profit. In the living room, Owen called out, "Hazel, I finished the outer edge. Want to help with the middle?" Hazel smiled. "Absolutely." She joined Owen on the floor, and Adrian watched them work together, his son chattering happily while Hazel patiently helped him find the right pieces. And he realized, with a clarity that felt like surfacing from deep water, that this moment, this connection, this life built on something real was exactly what he'd been searching for. The wrong interview had led to the right person at exactly the right time. And that accident, that beautiful collision of chance and choice, had saved them both. Not from failure or poverty or loneliness, though it had addressed all of those things, but from something deeper, the quiet despair of going through life without purpose, without connection, without believing that what you did actually mattered. Hazel Quinn had walked into Adrian Cole's office by mistake and walked out with a future neither of them could have predicted. And in the process, she'd taught him the most important lesson of his life, that real strength wasn't found in control or wealth or building walls high enough to keep the world out. It was found in showing up, doing the work that mattered, caring about people more than processes, and trusting that integrity and effort were enough. She'd changed his company. She'd changed his relationship with his son, and she'd changed him. And as they sat together in the warm glow of the living room, working on a puzzle of stars and planets, all three of them felt the same quiet certainty. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, with exactly who they were supposed to be with. The mistake had become the best thing that ever happened to any of them, and that, in the end, was the only thing that mattered.